Welcome to the History in Focus channel. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss more videos like this one. The German invasion of Belgian territory after the rejection of the German ultimatum in 1914. Belgium, despite being a neutral country, was invaded by Germany as part of a strategy to advance quickly and reach France. Germany demanded permission to cross Belgium to facilitate its attack on France, but the Belgian government refused to comply. A British soldier posing inside the muzzle of a captured .38 caliber artillery gun. Capturing enemy equipment, such as heavy artillery, was a demonstration of military success and the ability of armies to seize their opponent's weaponry. These captured weapons were often photographed for propaganda and morale-boosting purposes. Two female workers at the National Shell Filling Factory in England inspecting a batch of artillery shells. Ammunition factories were essential in ensuring that armies had a steady supply of weapons for battle. These women played a crucial role, filling shells with explosives and performing quality inspections. Military personnel attending a mass funeral in Cobh, Ireland, for the victims of the Lusitania disaster. Although it was a passenger ship, it also carried war munitions for the Allies, which fueled the German justification for the attack. However, most passengers and crew were unaware of the weapons cargo, which led to widespread public outrage against Germany. The unloading of pillbox demolishers on the Western Front. These enormous artillery devices, which weighed over 1,300 pounds, were designed to destroy enemy fortifications. These bombs were launched with the intention of creating massive explosions that generated enormous craters, capable of destroying both fortifications and trenches, along with the enemy troops inside them. British soldiers playing soccer while wearing gas masks in France. Despite the harsh conditions and the constant threat of gas attacks, soldiers often sought ways to relax and distract themselves, including improvised soccer matches. The USS Nebraska, a United States Navy warship, painted with dazzle camouflage. Dazzle camouflage was a technique designed to make it difficult for enemies to determine a ship's distance, direction, and speed, making it harder to target. The colors and geometric patterns painted on ships were intended to confuse observers, creating a visual effect that distorted the perception of movement and position. Austrian soldiers gathered around a train car. In a moment of rest, one of the soldiers plays a violin while smoking, providing a brief escape from the stress of war. This type of scene was common on the battlefronts, where soldiers tried to keep morale high and find moments of comfort in the difficult conditions of war. Music and cigarettes helped relieve tension between the intense fighting. A colossal crater created during the Battle of Messines in France. The British Second Army detonated 19 mines in 19 seconds, with the largest placed under Messines Ridge. The explosion was so powerful that it created a crater about 100 feet deep and more than 300 feet in diameter. The impact was devastating, killing thousands of German soldiers and causing confusion in enemy lines. Soldiers using the first model of a flamethrower, which was used in various battles and had an enormous psychological impact, forcing enemies to flee or take cover in a way that was almost impossible to defend against. The weapon became a symbol of the brutal combat of trench warfare, where the close proximity of soldiers and the violence of the weapons intensified suffering. A worker cleaning the interior of a naval gun at an ordnance works factory in London. Workers in these factories were frequently involved in the maintenance and preparation of large-scale artillery pieces, such as cannons and other heavy weaponry. Cleaning and inspecting these guns were important tasks to ensure their proper function on the battlefield. Biplane aircraft flying in formation. One of the primary aircraft used during the conflict, these planes were mainly used for reconnaissance, bombing, and especially aerial combat. Flying in formation was a strategy used to keep aircraft protected, coordinate attacks, and ensure greater efficiency in reconnaissance or bombing missions. German soldiers using gas masks while firing an anti-aircraft gun at low-flying aircraft. Gas masks became essential equipment for protecting troops in the trenches and in areas exposed to gas attacks. A German gas attack on the Eastern Front, recorded by a Russian aviator. The attack took place in a combat area in the east, where the Germans used chemical weapons to weaken enemy defenses. The wreckage of a Zeppelin shot down by a British aircraft in 1915 off the coast of Sussex, in England. Zeppelins were airships used by Germany to bomb targets in the United Kingdom and other parts of Europe. They were seen as a new and powerful tool for aerial warfare, capable of conducting nighttime attacks on cities and strategic installations. British artillery preparing to bombard German positions on the Western Front. Artillery pieces were fundamental to attack strategies, aiming to weaken enemy lines and prepare the ground for troop advances. These bombardments were often preceded by weeks of intense shelling, a method used to wear down enemy morale and cause maximum destruction. A German soldier throwing a hand grenade. The German army developed various grenade models, the most famous being the stick grenade. Its effect was more concussive compared to British and French grenades, which scattered lethal shrapnel. It was more effective in enclosed spaces, where the explosion's pressure could incapacitate enemies without requiring lethal fragments. A soldier diagnosed with what was known as shell shock. This term was used at the time to describe the severe psychological and physical effects suffered by soldiers exposed to grenade explosions and other violent attacks. Shell shock caused symptoms such as tremors, memory loss, temporary blindness, and, in severe cases, paralysis and complete disorientation. An American infantry soldier on the Western Front, suffocating from the effects of toxic gas. Gas masks were essential protection against these attacks, but despite this, many soldiers suffered from exposure to poison. The 9th British Lancer Squadron attacking German artillery in France. The use of cavalry was a tactic that, despite being outdated for some operations, was still employed on certain battlefronts. However, with advances in technology and the increasing effectiveness of firearms, such as machine guns and heavy artillery, attacks like this became increasingly risky and deadly. The sinking of the British ocean liner Lusitania. The ship was hit by a torpedo fired by a German submarine while sailing near the coast of Ireland. The attack resulted in the ship sinking in just 18 minutes and caused the deaths of more than 1,100 people, including civilians and American citizens. A German submarine in the Atlantic Ocean that sank an Allied sailing ship. Attacks on sailing ships and commercial vessels were a common strategy used by German submarines, which employed torpedoes to sink merchant ships without warning as part of unrestricted submarine warfare. This type of naval warfare had a major impact on Atlantic navigation, as the Allies depended on supplies coming from the United States and other regions. A member of the German railway troops washing clothes next to large 20-inch shells. Despite the intense warfare and extreme conditions, soldiers still had to perform basic tasks such as washing their uniforms. Workers in an ammunition factory in Woolwich, United Kingdom, finishing a batch of cartridges for small arms. The production of ammunition was essential to sustaining the Allied forces. Workers, including women, took on crucial roles in the factories as many men were on the battlefield. British artillery during the Gallipoli campaign. This battle was part of an attempt by the Allies, led by the British Empire, to open a new front against the Ottoman Empire. More than 100,000 people on both sides died. The rough terrain, extreme weather conditions, and strong Turkish resistance made the offensive one of the bloodiest and most failed of the war. A pile of shell casings from the ammunition used on the first day of the Battle of the Somme in 1916. German forces used 1,200 artillery guns, fired 2.5 million shells, and employed 1,300 ammunition trains. The daily ammunition supply weighed up to 55 million pounds, with a total of 14 million shells fired throughout the battle. The first tank used in history, the Mark I, during the Battle of the Somme. A heavily armored tank weighing more than 62,000 pounds and crewed by 8 people, but it faced various mechanical and maneuvering problems. Despite the difficulties, the use of the Mark I paved the way for the development of more efficient tanks in the following decades. German A-7V tanks crossing a village near Reims in France. The A-7V was the only tank model produced by Germany during the war, with only 20 units built. Armed with a 57mm cannon and machine guns, the armored vehicle was used in combat against Allied forces. Serbian soldiers taking positions on the front line during the Battle of Ser. This battle is particularly significant as it marked the first Allied victory. Serbian soldiers faced Austro-Hungarian forces that were much larger and better equipped. However, the tactical skill and resilience of the Serbian soldiers, along with the support of the local population, enabled the Serbian army to achieve a decisive victory. Adolf Hitler, on the right, who during World War I was an ordinary soldier in the 16th Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiment. During the conflict, Hitler served as a messenger and was wounded once, being hit by grenade shrapnel in 1916. A wounded soldier wearing a facial prosthesis developed to cover the severe facial injuries caused by the war. Many soldiers suffered facial wounds due to chemical weapons and explosions. To help restore their appearance and improve their quality of life, facial prostheses were created. These masks became an important solution for both physical and emotional recovery. A Friedrichshafen aircraft used by the German army after crashing into a building in an unknown location in Germany. The aircraft was employed in reconnaissance and bombing missions. After the war ended, production of these planes was halted due to restrictions imposed by the Treaty of Versailles, but their engineering influenced the design of future bombers. A German airplane that crashed directly into the ground. During this period, military aviation was becoming an increasingly important part of the conflict, with planes being used for reconnaissance, bombing, and aerial combat. Military aviation was marked by high risks, with many pilots losing their lives during the war. A female worker in a weapons factory. During this period, women began to take on many factory jobs, such as operating heavy machinery to manufacture weapons and ammunition parts. Working conditions were demanding and often dangerous due to the use of large machines and exposure to explosive materials. A dog pulling a Belgian machine gun cart in northern France. This type of transport was used to move heavy weapons quickly across trenches and muddy battlefields. Dogs were employed because they could navigate difficult terrain where vehicles could not operate. British tanks and troops parading in front of Bethlehem Royal Hospital in London. The parade took place as part of a celebration and recognition of the Allied victory in the war. A German soldier parachuting from an observation balloon after it was destroyed by an enemy attack. These balloons were frequently targeted by both enemy aircraft and anti-aircraft artillery, as their primary function was surveillance. The unloading of a horse in Çanakkale, Turkey. Horses played an essential role in transporting supplies and supporting military operations, especially in difficult terrain. They were also used to pull artillery, transport ammunition and food, and even serve in cavalry units, which were still important in trench warfare and rapid attacks. The French battleship Bouvet, a warship assigned to escort troop convoys and operate in the Mediterranean. However, the Bouvet was hit by several shells fired by Turkish forces and struck a submerged mine. The impact of the mine caused significant damage to the ship, which sank quickly, leading to the deaths of hundreds of crew members. German soldiers training with a flamethrower inside a trench. This weapon was widely used by the German army to project jets of fire onto enemy positions, forcing adversaries to abandon their shelters. German soldiers fleeing from a gas attack in Flanders. The use of poison gases such as mustard gas, phosgene, and chlorine caused significant casualties both on the battlefield and among civilians, and was one of the most feared forms of warfare of the time. Although gas masks were used for protection, the effectiveness of chemical weapons led to immense suffering and death. Members of the German Red Cross carrying a bottle of liquid to revive soldiers who had suffered the effects of a poison gas attack. The liquid carried by the rescuers was used to alleviate the immediate effects of gas, such as suffocation and respiratory irritation, providing temporary relief until the soldiers could be taken to a hospital for more intensive treatment. A young British soldier carrying shells in Messines, Belgium. During the battle, the British used tactics of massive mine explosions, creating large craters in the terrain. The task of transporting ammunition was crucial to keeping artillery operational, but was also extremely dangerous. Many young soldiers were forced to undertake risky and challenging tasks in intense battlefield conditions. A Canadian artillery officer writing a Christmas message on a heavy shell during the Battle of the Somme. Despite the hardships and suffering, soldiers tried to maintain a spirit of camaraderie and a sense of normalcy. A large group of soldiers participating in a religious service in a field. During the war, many troops found solace and strength in religion, and religious services were common, both on battlefields and in more remote areas. These ceremonies helped maintain morale, providing comfort in the face of loss and the challenges faced on the front. The bombing of Saint-Bertin Church in France. The church was targeted by heavy aerial and artillery attacks during the conflict. The bombing was part of the constant offensives between enemy armies, aiming to destroy strategic points and weaken enemy morale. The destruction of religious and historical sites was a characteristic of the war, as many buildings were damaged or destroyed during the attacks. A German observation post in Belgium, one of the main combat sites on the Western Front. Observation posts were located on elevated points, such as buildings or hills, to provide soldiers with a clear view of the battlefield. They were often camouflaged to avoid detection by the enemy. A pyramid built in New York composed of 12,000 German helmets, symbolizing the thousands of soldiers captured or killed during the war, as well as the defeat of the German Empire. These pyramids served as a memorial for the war's victims and as a tribute to the soldiers who fought in the conflict. The destruction caused by the Battle of Ypres in Belgium was particularly notable for its violence and the use of chemical weapons, such as poison gas, which caused even more casualties and worsened the brutality of trench warfare. It is estimated that about 200,000 to 300,000 soldiers lost their lives during the fighting. French troops advancing through a village in northeastern France in 1916. The event took place during the Battle of Verdun, one of the longest and bloodiest battles of the conflict. The battle involved intense fighting between French and German forces, with about 700,000 French and German soldiers killed, wounded, missing, or taken prisoner. French soldiers advancing across a field near Arras in France. The Battle of Arras was part of a joint effort between British, Canadian, Australian, and French forces to break through German lines and relieve pressure on France, where the Battle of Verdun was ongoing. It is estimated that about 160,000 soldiers were killed, wounded, or went missing during the battle. An old double-decker bus repurposed as a mobile loft for carrier pigeons. Each mobile loft could house between 60 and 75 pigeons at a time. The birds were trained to carry messages between the front lines and command posts, often flying in dangerous conditions to deliver critical information. An improvised operating room set up in a locker room in Russia. Improvised hospitals were set up in tents, abandoned buildings, schools, or even locker rooms and operated with minimal infrastructure. An improvised hospital could receive between 200 and 1,000 wounded per day. A hospital filled with people infected by the Spanish flu. During the war, the flu spread rapidly, worsened by war conditions such as troop movements and overcrowding. The Spanish flu infected about 1/3 of the world's population and caused the deaths of approximately 50 million people, more than the number of deaths recorded on the battlefields. A French cemetery in the Alsace region, an area disputed between France and Germany throughout history, which was the scene of several battles during the conflict. During the war, the region became a front line, with soldiers from both sides engaging in heavy and frequent combat. It is estimated that about 100,000 French and German soldiers lost their lives in Alsace during the conflict, the city of Dunkirk, France, after being bombed. The bombing occurred in 1917 when the city was targeted by German artillery and air attacks. Dunkirk, with its strategic port, was an important point for the transportation of supplies and troops, making it a significant military target. Chinese workers employed by the British Empire in Egypt. Hiring Chinese laborers was a common practice to address labor shortages on the battlefronts, as many men were deployed to the front lines. In Egypt, Chinese workers were primarily used for logistical support and maintenance in the field, playing a fundamental role in the functioning of British colonies during the conflict. Employees at the Chemical Development Laboratory in Philadelphia in 1919 testing gas masks. This laboratory was one of the centers responsible for studying and improving protective equipment, such as gas masks, which became essential for survival on the front lines. Mustard gas and chlorine gas were used by the German army for large-scale attacks, causing harm to soldiers and civilians alike. A trench system in Long Island, United States, used as a training center where American troops were prepared before being sent to Europe to fight in the war. These trenches were built to simulate combat conditions on the front lines, especially on the Western Front, where trenches were used as defensive systems. American troops passing through a devastated city near Saint-Mihiel in France after the Battle of Saint-Mihiel. This battle was one of the first major interventions by the United States and an important victory for the Allies. During the fighting, cities and villages in the region suffered great destruction due to intense bombings and clashes. Belgians watching the passage of German troops through Brussels during the invasion of Belgium. Despite being a neutral country, Belgium refused to allow the German army to pass through its territory, leading to the German invasion. Brussels, the Belgian capital, was taken by German troops in August of 1914. A group of American soldiers on the Western Front during the World War I, firing a 37mm gun at a German position in France. Although of smaller caliber compared to other heavy weapons, the 37mm gun still played an important role in attacks on enemy positions, such as trenches and fortifications, which were characteristic of warfare on the Western Front. A team of British Vickers machine gunners from the Machine Gun Corps wearing PH gas helmets, which were developed to protect soldiers from poison gas attacks that began to be used on a large scale during the war. These masks, while crucial for troop protection, were uncomfortable and made breathing difficult, but they were necessary for survival in the trenches. A sergeant from the Royal Engineers Signaling Section placing a message in a cylinder attached to a messenger dog's collar. These dogs played a vital role in communication between combat units, especially in areas where traditional communication lines were destroyed. They were trained to follow specific routes and deliver messages efficiently, often under enemy fire. Doctors treating a wounded soldier at a Belgian military field hospital. Although conditions were simple and improvised, these hospitals played a crucial role in treating serious injuries caused by heavy artillery, rifle fire, explosions, and chemical weapon attacks. Soldiers from an Australian 4th Division Field Artillery Brigade walking along a plank road in a muddy and destroyed battlefield in Chateau Wood, Belgium. This location was the site of intense battles, especially along the Western Front, where terrain conditions were extremely difficult. British soldiers on motorcycles in the Dardanelles, a region of the Ottoman Empire, before the Battle of Gallipoli. Motorcycles were used for reconnaissance missions, rapid transport of messages, and logistical support. British soldiers preparing for the campaign relied on these motorcycles to move quickly across difficult terrain and maintain communication between units. British soldiers, known as Highlanders, carrying sandbags to the front. The use of sandbags was essential to reinforce trenches and protect soldiers from enemy fire. They were stacked around trenches to provide a protective barrier against explosions and bullets, as well as to stabilize the trench walls, which could collapse due to wet soil and constant bombardment. American soldiers from the 117th Trench Mortar Battery of Maryland, operating a trench mortar during an attack in Badenwiller, France. Trench mortars were designed to launch explosives in a high arc, allowing them to strike targets protected in enemy trenches. A stretcher patrol slowly crossing the muddy battlefield in Flanders during the British offensive in the region. The waterlogged terrain resulting from constant rain and bombardment made the rescue of wounded soldiers extremely difficult. Soldiers faced extreme conditions, sinking up to their knees in mud while carrying the injured to medical stations. An improvised bridge over the muddy plains in Flanders, Belgium, after the destruction caused by intense fighting in 1917. The region was heavily bombarded during battles, turning the ground into a deep swamp where soldiers and equipment easily sank. Infrastructure was destroyed, and passages like this were essential for the movement of troops and supplies. An aerial view of the devastated landscape of the Western Front, specifically at Combres Hill in northeastern France. The vast network of trenches had formed over years of combat, leaving numerous craters from heavy bombardments, mortars, and underground mines. The land was deeply scarred by destruction, with the landscape permanently altered by the intensity of the conflict. A German hospital dedicated to treating wounded expedition dogs. When injured, these dogs were carefully treated in hospitals like this, which were set up to care for war animals. During the conflict, many dogs were wounded in combat, and their recovery was crucial to the success of operations. Veterinarians had to deal with serious injuries, offering specialized treatments such as bandages, surgeries, and even prosthetics for animals. German troops during a break from combat. These breaks were common during the war, when soldiers had to endure long periods of tension and constant fighting. Smoking was a common way to relax and, for many, a means of coping with the stress of war. Additionally, reading or writing letters was a way to keep morale high and maintain contact with the outside world, away from the chaos of the trenches. Belgian soldiers advancing through the rubble in a devastated landscape, a result of the intense fighting that took place in Belgium. The destruction caused by the war was visible everywhere, with buildings and infrastructure reduced to ruins. During the early years of the conflict, Belgian forces resisted the German invasions bravely, especially during the Battle of Liège and the defense of other strategic points. British soldiers offering a cigarette to a wounded German prisoner of war. This gesture took place along the Western Front, where prisoners were captured in intense battles that occurred between 1914 and 1918. Soldiers waiting for medical attention at a field station near Béthune, France. During the Battle of Estaires, British soldiers were blinded due to tear gas used on the front lines. The battle was one of many that occurred during the German offensive of 1918, when the fighting was intense and the use of poison gases became more frequent. Wounded soldiers being treated in a trench during the Courcelette operation, part of the Battle of the Somme in France. Trenches were where most battles took place and also served as locations for the initial treatment of the wounded. Shrapnel exploding over a reserve trench in Canadian lines during the Battle of the Somme. Canadian soldiers faced extreme conditions in the trenches, being constantly targeted by heavy bombardments and artillery attacks. The extensive use of artillery was one of the primary tactics of the battles, causing devastation and making trenches extremely dangerous places for soldiers. A controlled explosion on the Somme battlefield. The explosion was set off by British Royal Engineers to clear a path for advancing troops. The tactic of controlled explosions was used to destroy enemy fortifications, such as trenches and barbed wire, helping to prepare the ground for the advance of Allied forces. Civilians and soldiers from the British Royal Army Medical Corps distributing supplies to the wounded in France. The Royal Army Medical Corps played a vital role in providing care to injured soldiers, while civilians also participated in efforts to alleviate the suffering of troops. A group of armed Indian soldiers positioned in a trench. Soldiers from British colonies, such as the Indians, fought alongside the Allies on various fronts, including in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. An infantry soldier receiving a cigarette from an American Red Cross volunteer at an evacuation hospital in France. After months of intense combat, wounded soldiers were often taken to field hospitals, where Red Cross teams provided care. German prisoners of war helping transport wounded Australian soldiers, likely after a battle on the Western Front. Prisoners once captured by the enemy were often used for support tasks, such as carrying the wounded, as the demands of combat required all available resources and efforts. A large group of German prisoners captured during an Allied advance on the Western Front. These prisoners were taken during an offensive in which Allied forces managed to break through enemy lines and force German troops to surrender. The prisoners were often transported to camps where they remained for the duration of the conflict. Wounded Canadian soldiers being transported to a field hospital on a light railway, moving them away from the front lines. This type of transport was used to quickly evacuate injured soldiers from intense combat zones so they could receive medical treatment. A French officer standing near fresh graves of soldiers who died on the Champagne front in eastern France. This location was the site of intense battles, particularly in the offensives of 1915 and 1917. The officer is in an area where many soldiers perished during the fighting. A shop in Paris where handcrafted copper prosthetic masks were created and sold. The masks were applied directly to patients' faces and shaped to blend as seamlessly as possible with the skin. With 21 million soldiers wounded during the conflict, many returned with permanent scars, leading them to seek solutions such as prosthetic masks.